How can this unspeakable carnage stop? You know, the United Nations estimates that 275,000 people right now remain trapped in Aleppo. Can they be saved? For joining us now for more, and this is Jim Walsh, international security expert for MIT Security Studies program. You know, Jim, it's just beyond comprehension. We just saw a little boy running from a bombing in the smoke-filled street. Right at this moment, families are sitting in dark rooms. They have no electricity. They are waiting for the bombs to fall and wondering if they're going to die. And the world and we are helpless to stop Russia and Syria. What specifically, if anything, can we do?
Unfortunately, Eric, you're right. It's not just a humanitarian crisis. I think it's a set of war crimes. Certainly, by the Syrian government, has repeatedly committed war crimes during this war, using chemical weapons and fuel arrow bombs. And now I think there's strong evidence that Russia has violated international law. Bombing hospitals, targeting civilians, that is a complete break with international law or decency. As to what is to be done, the U.S. has air power, but it does not have troops on the ground, and hard for it to materially affect what's going on. The U.S. mission there right now is counterterrorism. It's going after ISIS, and has not yet adopted a mission of targeting the Syrian government. But even if it did, there's only so much you can do with air power, and we don't have a lot of friends on the ground to have a coordinated response like we do in Iraq, where we have the Iraqi government and the Kurds.
What about like sanctioning Russia or putting the pressure on Vladimir Putin? I mean, he's done this before. In Chechnya, the reports bombing civilians, bombing indiscriminately, just flattening and leveling cities while he's doing this. You talk about war crimes. Those big Buster bombs that were reportedly being falling on Aleppo, those are for military installations, and they only come from Russia.
Absolutely, and you were right to point to crimes in Chechnya and elsewhere. I think it's terrible, but it's hard to know what can be done materially to change it right now. You mentioned sanctions. Yes, on sanctions, but I need to be honest with you on that. As Russia weighs the increased sanctions versus its national interests in Syria, it's probably going to continue to do what it's doing in Syria, sanctions or no sanctions. Yeah, that doesn't mean we shouldn't impose them. We should, but we shouldn't expect them to change Russian behavior in the near term. I mean,
they're being shamed by our United States Ambassador Samantha Power in the Security Council. Doesn't stop them. We're going to. John Kerry talked about cutting off ties and talks with the Syrian situation. I mean, what's that going to do?
Well, unfortunately, there are not many good options. Again, I think it's worth looking at sanctions, but that's not going to change Russian behavior. The Russians have an advantage. They're working with the central government in Syria. The government is on their side. In Iraq, we're working with the central government, and that's why we're able to make progress against ISIS. But we're in a very, very different situation in Syria, where the government is with the Russians, and those who oppose the government include lots and lots of violent extremists, and which we don't have many friends. Again, when you go into these things, you have to say, what's your objective? What's your likelihood of success? What's it going to cost? What do you do when it's all said and done? And to most of those questions, there are not good military answers, which is why most of the military is opposed to deeper involvement directly in that civil war.
Yeah, and finally, could there be potential action in the International Criminal Court? The Washington Post had a front-page piece of the day. Let me read you one paragraph of that. It is just astounding about what's going on in there. This is, quote, this is from people there. Sometimes we hear the pilot tell his base, we see a market for the terrorist. There is a bakery for the terrorist. Is it okay to hit them? They say, okay, hit them. Every time they use the adjective terrorist, it is devastating and depressing beyond belief. You are pulling corpses from the rubble. You don't know if one day that body will belong to your sister, your brother, or your friend. I mean, can't, in the future, potential charges be brought? Or, as I said at the beginning of the segment, sadly, we again have another level of carnage that's just totally beyond belief.
Well, Eric, I hope so. I hope those responsible, including Assad and including Russians giving those orders, are held accountable before the International Criminal Court and face sanctions, imprisonment, and all the punishments they deserve. It's more likely that will happen to the leader of a smaller country like Syria than of a major player like Russia, but I would certainly support that.
Jim Walsh, thank you for your insight as this tragedy continues, and we'll stay on it.
Thank you, Eric.